Alrighty, and we are live. Welcome, folks, to Cruz's Corner Point 5. I'm your host, Cruz. Hello. And I call it Point 5 because this podcast has not officially been launched yet. We're still kind of getting it figured out, but the best way to do that is to practice. So one of our first episodes here is with someone who's very near and dear to my heart, my loving stepfather, Brent Barber. Hello, Brent. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Wonderful. Glad to hear it. And, I don't want to butcher it, so why don't I just have you introduce yourself? Just what's the deal with you, Brent? What are you doing with your life? What are you all about?
So, hello all. I'm Brent Barber, and what am I all about? These days, I'm all about dad life, I'd have to say. Yeah.
Nice.
Dad life. Corralling two crazy toddlers and rising and grinding, I guess.
Nice.
Yeah.
And in your professional life, you're a United States Border Patrol agent, correct?
Mm-hmm, that's correct.
What is your official title?
I'm a Special Operations Supervisor, so that'd be my official title.
Gotcha. And what are the special operations that you're supervising all about? What's that kind of like?
So I work out of San Diego, so I'm out of the San Diego sector for the Border Patrol. The sector as a whole has about 2,500 agents assigned to the sector. Our Special Operations Detachment has approximately 85 operators within the Special Operations Detachment, and we have 3 divisions. So I command one of the 3 divisions, and our division has 22.
Okay.
22 members, to include myself.
So you're supervising 21 guys, 22 including yourself then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. And so let's backtrack it then. What got you, because I know you have a really interesting story. There's all kinds of twists and turns in there. So Let's take it back to, what got you into that? How'd you end up a United States Border Patrol agent?
So I was, let's see when this would be, probably 94 or 95. And I was actually working for the same company as your dad, Dave, Vanguard Steel. As you know, Dave and I grew up together, and our circle of friends were always the same.
In Diamond Bar?
In Diamond Bar, yeah. So there was about 4 or 5 of us that were all from the same kind of group growing up in high school, and we worked for Vanguard Steel, and we all had similar stories. Like Vanguard was this landing place for misfits that had either gotten their girlfriends pregnant or gotten kicked out of their house and were all shacked up together in some apartment somewhere in Pomona or something, just we were all at that stage of our life. We were all kind of painting ourselves into the corner, and Vanguard was this open arm place that would give anybody a job. And it was always like, tell your buddies, come to work, and so
Yeah.
my best friend at the time, Elijah, he was working for them, and so I had gotten my girlfriend pregnant and was expecting Caleb. Caleb was on the way, and so it was kind of a man, I need some work, and so I tapped into my friend group, and they told me to come on down to Vanguard and start working and making some money. So I did that. I was working with them for it was maybe 8 months or so, and we were doing a La Jolla job. So we were driving from Pomona all the way down to La Jolla in North San Diego County, back and forth every day. And so we were coming back up the highway every day, going through the San Clemente Border Patrol checkpoint. And the only visibility I had into the Border Patrol back then was being a kid surfing at San Onofre State Beach. Mm. And you would actually see the illegals walking on the train tracks or walking through the state park.
Wow.
And there'd be, 6 or 8 of them at a time. And I guess what they used to do back then was they'd come up and load vehicles, and if the checkpoint was up, they would drop them off somewhere to the south, and they would either walk up the beach or walk the train tracks just off Camp Pendleton. And then when they would get around the checkpoint, they'd load back up and go wherever it was they were going. So that was their way of circumventing the checkpoint. Hmm. So when we were kids, we used to laugh because you couldn't leave your coolers or any of your food outside of your car when you went down to go surfing, because it was quite a walk to get down to the bluffs. Because you come back and your cooler would be raided, and it was just because the aliens were hungry, and so they're not going to walk by a cooler without checking to see if there's something to drink or something to eat.
Gotcha.
I certainly wouldn't. So we used to always laugh because the illegals would raid our coolers and take our food, take our beer, that we weren't supposed to have in the first place. But
that's funny.
So anyway, that was my only exposure to the Border Patrol. Is occasionally you would see like a van going up and down through the state beach, and you'd be like, "Oh, there's Border Patrol." And so we're driving up from this job in La Jolla one day, and one of the foremen that I was working with had happened to mention as we were waiting in line to go through the checkpoint that his brother-in-law, so his wife's brother, had just gotten hired with them and was out in Nogales, Arizona. And he was basically saying, he goes, "Man, my brother-in-law reminds me exactly of you. And he's, not the law enforcement type. He's not that type of guy, but he, got in with these guys and he loves it. He's an adrenaline junkie. He loves the outdoors and he's super happy." And so he just kind of mentioned that. We started talking about it a little bit about what he did, what his brother had mentioned the job was like. Didn't really think much of it. Went through the checkpoint. Like I said, didn't talk about it again. A couple days later, I'm working with him again, coming back through, and he goes, "Hey, you know what? I really think you should try to get a job with these guys. Like, you need to get out of this line of work." That's what he said, because he was an older guy. He was probably in his early 40s at the time, and he had been doing construction and ironwork all his life. And he was just saying how, like, how tired he is and how broken he is. His back always hurts, and he's never really got ahead in life financially. He's just always been paycheck to paycheck. And so he was saying, like, you can't do this the rest of your life. This is okay for you now, but you need to find something else. And if these guys are hiring and it's a good job for the government, you should apply. And again, this is before the internet. This is before that access to the information, So I didn't even know where to look to get information. I had no idea.
So he saw something in you. Like, was there a reason that he did he tell a lot of people that, or was there like just you? Like he was like, "You got to get out of this, kid. This is okay for these other guys your age, but you got more. There's more in you than this."
It's interesting. So the guy that brought it up, his name was David James, and he wasn't real popular in the company. He had kind of like a hot temper. He was real moody. He flat out did not like my friend Elijah. Couldn't stand him. He wouldn't even work on the same job with him. He's very stubborn. Like, "Hey, I'm the most senior guy here. This is the way we're gonna do it." And I was always the type of guy that was like, "Hey, you're the boss. You got it. Let's go. You want me to go? You want me to do this? I'll do this. I don't care." And so him and I always got along well because he respected that. I guess that kind of like towing the line. Like, I recognized him as, as leadership within this job I'm doing. So I always followed him and did what he needed. So him and I got along well, where he didn't quite get along with most guys in the company. And he wasn't a big drinker and partier, and he was kind of that squared away family guy.
And were most of the people who did work there kind of like the partier types?
Big time, yeah.
Gotcha.
Well, like I said, it was kind of like this landing place for misfits, of all walks of life. So it was very, very, and you were kind of outcast. So the guy running the place was a huge partier, huge drinker. So if you hung out at the yard after the day's work with Doug, and you drank beers with him, or showed up with a case of beer for him to partake with, you got the good jobs. You were on the good side.
Gotcha.
And Dave was never one of those guys, and I certainly wasn't either. So, him and I got along real well. So to answer your question, I don't know if he was, if he saw something in me. He never said. He never said, like, "Hey, this is you have the qualities that I think would be good for this job." It was just this discussion we had, multiple times going up through that checkpoint. So I brought it up one day. I said, "Hey, I tried to find information on the place, and I can't find anything." I said, "It'd be weird to, like, we look like degenerates coming up through that highway dirty from work all day. It'd be weird to be like, 'Hey, you got information on how to, how to work for you?'" So he called his brother-in-law, and his brother-in-law gave him this recruiting contact 1-800 number to call. And so he gave me the number, and I held on to it for a while, just kind of like not really thinking much about it. And at one point I left that company. I started getting a reputation for myself within the ironworker community and different guys. And there was always this weird recruiting thing with different companies.
Like a reputation for being like a good worker, like a hard worker
yeah,
kind of guy?
Like Vanguard was absolutely, like, if you were looking at like in a high school sports pecking order, they were like the freshman soft, like the fresh soft team.
Gotcha.
You know, they weren't even junior varsity.
Mm-hmm.
They were just like the bare minimum. Not that they didn't have good, solid guys working there, but yeah, for the most part, it just wasn't the place where you're going to progress in your career if you're going to stick with this line of work. Mm. So I got recruited from a guy from Pacific Rebar, which was a union shop in Ontario that did big jobs, big like government jobs, and bridge decks, that kind of stuff, like highway work, or big warehouses for big companies like Coke.
Mm-hmm. Moving up in the world.
Well, yeah, I mean, it just was, it was like they offered me a $10 an hour raise, which is, like, well, of course I'm going to go work for you.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there's no question, right? You're going to double my salary. Like, yeah, I'm going to come work for you. I was a foreman in like 4 months, had a truck, and was...
So it's like the late 90s about...
Well, it was that same year, so it was probably, like I said, 94, 95. I don't remember exactly.
So it happened quick.
Oh, no, wait. So she was pregnant with Caleb, so that had to be 95. Yeah. And so I went and worked with these guys, and it's funny because I started really enjoying the work, like really enjoying it. And another mentor of mine with Pacific Rebar, one day we're working a job together, and we're like in the slab, tying up rebar and doing work. And he said the same exact thing to me that David James had said to me that other day. He goes, "You know what, kid?" He goes, "You're liking this too much." And he goes, "You need to get out of this before you get hooked on the money and hooked on the work and the culture and all that kind of stuff. I can see that you're liking it too much. You need to get out of this line of work."
Wow, that's so interesting.
And so this guy's name was Sam, and we called him Sambo. So he was like 50. He was older than David. He was probably like 51, 52, just all his life working steel work. So this guy's skin was like black and leathery, and just... He walked all bow-legged like this like cliche cowboy from an old movie, like a gunslinger, because his hip sockets were worn out from carrying steel his whole life.
Oh, wow.
And so he said, he goes, "You want to end up like me? Like, look at me, man." He's like, "I probably got skin cancer and don't even know it because I don't go to the doctor." And he's like, "I'm broken. I'm not going to enjoy my retirement." He's like, "You got to get out of this." And so I mentioned to him, I said, "That's funny because another foreman I had at my other company actually gave me a 1-800 number for the Border Patrol telling me I need to get out of this." And he starts laughing. He's like, "Ah, La Migra." Ha. And there's a whole bunch of illegal alien guys that worked on our crew, so they're all laughing and teasing me, "Oh, yeah, you're going to be La Migra." Ha.
That's funny. Join the other team.
And it was just kind of something that triggered something in me, like, hey, one guy's saying it's one thing, another guy bringing it up again, like they're recognizing something in me that I have potential to excel, and they're actually steering me away. So instead of saying like, "Oh, this guy's good for this company and he's already a foreman and he's all this and he's all that, let's get this guy in," they're actually looking at me and being respectful and saying, you should go the other direction. And so it just kind of, like I said, it struck a nerve, and I said, that one guy's one thing, two guys is another. I'm going to call that number and see what happens. I'm going to throw it to the universe, So I called the number, and it was weird because I'll remember it to this day. It was this weird like Soundex program where you had to like use a touch tone phone and put all your name and social security number in it by like doing the buttons that correspond with the letters. Like, talk about old school.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was this thing that got you a call back. So they would do an initial screening based on your name, date of birth, and social security number, and that was the first tier. It's like basically, are you a felon? Are you a citizen? Can they verify, based on this information?
Yeah, yeah.
And then so a recruiter called me back, and I had a phone conversation about why do I want to be in the job and this and that. And so he mails me this packet, and then the rest is history. It's just like, how it works with government jobs. You're filling out 150 papers with redundant information, and you mail it back. You wait 3 months and you get something else in the mail, and you fill out all that, you mail it back, and then 3 months later you get something else in the mail,
Yeah, yeah.
So the whole process just went from there. And I actually had, because I was applying with a job in law enforcement, I started looking at other jobs in law enforcement and what the career was like and the benefits. And it turns out I went to a recruiting fair thing to try to actually see a Border Patrol agent and talk to them in person. Mm-hmm. They didn't end up being there, but a lot of other law enforcement agencies were there. So just for shits and giggles, really, I applied with a couple other agencies.
Oh.
And LAPD picked me up in their hiring process. So I went all the way through their hiring process at the same time as I was going through the Border Patrol's hiring process. And I got to the panel interview where I had a panel interview waiting for a panel interview. So I made it through the background, the initial background, all the process. And I was waiting for my date to go have my panel interview, which included like the psychiatric evaluation and all that kind of stuff and the test, and which is pretty much the final step before they either offer you an academy date or not. And the Border Patrol called me and basically offered me a job, offered me a position in San Diego.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so I was just kind of like, I had pretty much decided whichever one offers me a spot first, I'm just going to take it. And it turned out to be a blessing, because the LAPD had a provision when I was going through the process where you had to live within 12 miles of your duty station.
Oh, okay.
So after you got out of the academy, they'd put you somewhere, and wherever they put you, you had to have a physical address in a 12-mile radius. So I don't know. I mean, I would have probably loved the job. I probably would have, very much enjoyed it. But in that stage of my life, it would have been pretty intense, depending on where it was I got assigned, on having to physically relocate. So the option of even commuting wasn't there. They give you a certain time window, and then you have to physically live within that 12 miles.
Gotcha.
Which is a crazy concept when you think about it. Like, it's almost insulting to the communities that you're going to serve. They're like trying to do this forced gentrification.
I see what you're saying.
Like bringing all the cops into the community to interact with the public they're policing. Like, I understand the concept
It sounds nice.
It kind of does. It kind of sounds nice from I don't know, like in a touchy-feely kind of way, but it's almost insulting too. Like,
yeah. Like, well, almost on the surface, it's like, well, we're gonna have the people who are policing these neighborhoods live near them so that they are a part of the neighborhoods and like experience the culture and aren't just some outsider who comes and goes on and off the clock. But I'd never really thought about it like that until you just said that right now. How it's kind of like a gentrification. Like, it's like, we're going to take the people who are monitoring you and we're going to insert them into your community.
Right.
Like by require, not by their own choice. See, that's the thing that's weird, is that you might have some kind of feelings of like almost resentment or just frustration
absolutely.
by the officers. Like, I don't want to effing live here.
Right.
So,
So anyway, I ended up in the Border Patrol. I took the position. They started my actual full background investigation immediately. And so I just had to wait till that got cleared. And once that got cleared, I got an academy date, and I started officially on April 7th of 1997 is when I touched down and took my oath to the Constitution. And here I am 23 and some odd months later, still doing it. So
still kicking it.
Obviously something stuck, and I fit in okay,
Yeah, well, I mean, that's super interesting that not just one, but two of your, mentors or superiors or what have you saw something in you, and so much so that they had to say something, that they felt compelled to say something to you. And I mean, have you ever thought about how crazy of an effect such a relatively small action has had on the trajectory of your life?
Oh, incredibly. I mean, and that's just one small thing. I mean, I can look back on the journey from, I mean, shoot, you can pick it, you can pick, I can apply crazy things that were looked at in my family's life when I was a child, things that happened to my parents that at the time were kind of thought to be adverse, like, oh man, this is a time we have to muscle through, and it caused us to go right instead of left as a family, whether it was just a decision in career or it was something intense like relocating to another state to live in, There's all sorts of forks in the road and things that happen that I can say, if that didn't happen, where would I be? Man, if that didn't happen, where would I be? There's dozens of them, so. And
I'm sure it probably has an effect, because now you are in a supervisory leadership position where now you're the guy who probably sees talent and stuff. I mean, but then again, you're not in the steel industry. You're actually in the, a kind of an end game place where if someone's there, they probably should be there. But I mean, do you ever find yourself in a position where you see a guy who either maybe he's just not cut out for the job, or maybe do you ever come across like a candidate or a new hire or whatever that you see and is like, you know what, I think that he could do more than this? Does that ever kind of come across, or?
No, see, I've had it's about balance, I think, right? So there's some guys that I work with that would, so let's use that concept, right? So let's say I have a young agent that works on my team. I actually have one right now. That's the guy I mentioned to you earlier. We're having a conversation. He came to me for some mentoring, for some counseling, and he's younger than you. So he's 23. And he was struggling with some things, and one of the things he was struggling with is that he had applied for the FBI and made it all the way to the panel interview, which is the last step in their process, which is very tedious and very hard to get through. They have very high prerequisites to get into the FBI. He made it all the way to the panel and failed, and he did not get offered a position. You can only do that twice in the FBI. If you make it to the panel, you got 2 shots, and then you're banned for life, and there's no exceptions.
Wow.
And you don't have a rebuttal process. There's no like appeal. There's no like, well, I'd like to know why and take it to the next level and see if that was the just decision. They trust their panels unequivocally. And if they say no, the answer is no. So he already has 1 strike and he only gets 2. And this just recently happened in the last couple of months. And then, so he's coming to me reluctantly because he doesn't want to insult me. Because he knows how much pride I have in my agency, and he knows how much pride I have in my unit. And our unit has a secondary qualification process. So just because you're a Border Patrol agent who's made it through the academy and passed journeyman status, you can't just walk onto my team. We have an initial 11-day selection process that is very, very strenuous, very low failure ratio. So I call it, you get 1 bad day is what I tell the guys in my briefings. I'll give you 1 bad day, but you don't get 2. You have 2, you remove yourself from this selection.
You're even more stringent than the FBI.
Well,
just kidding.
In some ways, yes. You know, like we require a lot from our guys in special operations. So as an example, we had 17 applicants, 17 candidates in our last selection, and we passed 3. So, and he was one of the 3 from our last selection.
Okay.
So he knows how much pride I have in our team. So you can see how it's an interesting concept to go and say, hey, look, boss, I'd really like to talk to you about some things that are bothering me and get some guidance from you. You know, you've got 23 years in this gig, and you know this and you know that, and you've been through a lot in your personal life, and I really would like some mentoring. I'm really upset because I didn't get a job to leave your team because I want something else, you know?
Yeah.
So you have to look at that and go, okay, like, is this the best place for this guy? He's an amazing, mature professional, especially for his age and his limited life experience. And then there's generational issues. You know, you've heard me complain about different things, you know, like, I would have never done that when I was your age, that kind of shit, you know. But he's a wonderful agent. He's an amazing operator in special operations. He's a fast learner. He's that go-to guy already that you can trust with some pretty difficult tasks. And so I would hate to lose this guy. Anybody would. But I have to step out of myself and step out of my own achievements and not be insulted by the fact that one of his biggest challenges he's looking for help with is that he couldn't leave. I have to look, is this the best place for him? Like, him having goals to go to the FBI is not, let's get to the root of where those goals come from. And then let's decide if I'm going to be insulted or not, you know? And the thing was when after talking to him for quite a long time, it was easy to see that it was nothing against the Border Patrol. It was nothing against my agency that I take such pride in and I'm completely happy with and would never want to leave. It wasn't that. It was the specific mission that interested him, and he wanted to get his foot in the door and gain some maturity and learn some law enforcement skills and really make an educated choice. So like his entire path of coming into the Border Patrol and being with us for a few years and then coming into special operations, it was all about him giving himself the tools and the information to make a really mature decision that impacted his future incredibly. And so after talking to him, I realized like the Border Patrol is not the best place for him. And at some point he's going to get burned out and he's not going to be happy. He's not going to be the agent he is today. And the best thing for him and for the nation, as far as that's concerned, is for him to progress in his career and move on to other things. and he always wanted to get into the investigation side. So at the end of our conversation, I ended up reaching out to a very, very good friend that left the Border Patrol, went to the FBI.
Oh, wow.
And I reached out to him and I asked him if he would be willing to mentor this agent that I have, and he was more than happy to do that favor for me. And I connected them, and now he has this sponsorship going into the second set of application process because he has to start over. So now he has another tool to help him succeed in his goal that he didn't have before, and it was all because I was able to really step out of myself, and help him and make that connection, for him to move into his journey.
Wow, but good for him, man. It sounds like whoever this guy is, we won't give him by name, but he sounds like a very mature person. I mean, only 23 to have it that laid out and to be this far along already, and then to have the gumption to come and talk to you and phrase it the right way that it doesn't push your buttons. Yeah. And then on top of that, I mean, that's a very mature, wise approach from your side to be able to step outside of yourself and step back and not take it personally and anything like that. That is one thing I kind of wanted to touch on. We were talking about something earlier or yesterday about how your views on the amount of training that we do, or the law enforcement does. I'm not law enforcement, but that law enforcement does, as far as de-escalating situations and stuff. And I'll let you explain it, but my general feeling that I got from it is it was your perspective that you take, you described de-escalating a traffic stop with an unruly, what's the word for him? Perp or whoever.
Yeah, subject.
Yeah, with an unruly subject, an uncooperative
citizen.
Subject. Yeah, citizen,
anything,
exactly.
Just anything would be fine, yeah.
And you laid out a very, very calm and patient and effective strategy to deal with that I thought was, very, very mature, very profound. And my general feeling that I got was that wasn't the norm. Is like you're almost the exception of taking that calm, de-escalating approach. What am I accurate in that assessment, or how would you categorize that?
I would say that so to back up, the example I used was you're on a traffic stop and you get they're going to crack the window just enough so we can communicate audibly, and they're going to keep their hands. They're not being physically threatening. Their hands are on the wheel, so there's no overt threat that the officer can observe. You just get that. You get that. We call them the old school guys call them the alpha Henrys, right? The assholes. The guy's just decided today he's just not going to cooperate. He doesn't think he should have been pulled over. He doesn't want to recognize your authority. He's not taking it to that next level, but he's just going to be a jerk, and who knows why. It could be a million reasons. Bad day, the guy just got some bad news. We all have bad days, and it just so happens that the officer and that guy's paths crossed on that certain time, right? So there's two ways you can go, and that's what we were discussing. Was you can say, "Oh, okay, you're going to challenge me, I'm the officer here, yeah, authority and my man, right?" So we're typically, guys in law enforcement and women in law enforcement are very type A, and not only that, we're taught from the second you get to the academy and you start the physical training, the defensive tactics, you are not allowed to lose, right? We brought that up as well. You're not allowed to lose. If you lose a fight, then you are incapacitated. It doesn't matter if your adversary has a weapon or not, because they have yours. You bring that weapon to every confrontation. So every fight is a gunfight.
Yeah, exactly. I never heard that before until you were telling me yesterday. That's
I remember the day my PT instructor said that. We were in the mat room, and we were kind of joking around. We were doing different skills, and we were, playing grab ass a little bit in the mat room, and nothing overt, but he didn't like the attitude, and he lost his mind, this PT instructor. Lost his mind, screaming at the top of his lungs, "Listen here, you motherfuckers. Get in front of me at attention." And he starts walking through the ranks, spitting on our face, screaming in our face.
Full Metal Jacket style.
Yeah, but we're in tight bike shorts and t-shirts and tube socks, in PT. We're not in our barracks and our marine uniforms. So it's it's interesting to have someone screaming at you when you're in your funky 70s looking PT gear. But anyway, so he's yelling at us, and he had said that at some point in his rant. Every fight is a gunfight. And I had never thought of that before. I had never stopped and went, like, holy shit. Like that's true. You know, like we can take this seriously and kind of, hey, sometimes you lose, sometimes you win, but you know, every fight is a gunfight. And it just resonated with me. I can remember it to this day, you know, years later, what that felt like when that actually sunk in, you know. So anyway, back to the point. So yeah, we were talking about the paths you can go and the mindset and the perception of winning that situation or bringing that situation to an acceptable resolution for everybody, right? So my personal example was how I'd like to just remove the officer when I get called on scene to a stop like that. And there's that challenge, there's that cracked window, and there's the guy that's not giving him any of the information, not providing his ID, just keeps saying, am I under arrest? Am I under arrest? That's the thing they love to do. They like to turn the cell phone video on, point it at the officer, and just keep saying, am I under arrest? Am I under arrest? And it's really frustrating because of course they're not under arrest. How could we possibly know, you know? So I like to remove the officer, and then I like to tell them, look, we're on the clock. We're being paid to provide a service to the taxpayer, to the citizens. We're not here to fight. We're not here to push our authority. We're not going to win in that scenario. Let me talk to them. And I would always go talk to the motorists. We would put some tire deflation devices in front of the car and tell them they are not free to leave, but they are not under arrest. They are deciding to detain themselves by not cooperating with the basic information we're requesting so that we can conduct our field investigation, which is what every traffic stop is. It is a field investigation. We are investigating, gaining information to decide if a crime is present or not. 9 and 3/4 times out of 10, it's not. And the motorist is on their way, right? And I would just explain that to them. And then I would give them a chance to calm down, and we would just go wait. And then at some point, the motorist would get tired of sitting there. 10, 15 minutes later, they realize that we're going to sit there all day. And they would, you know, make some signal that they're ready to talk. We'd get their ID. We'd conduct our field investigation, and off they go. You know, no harm, no foul. So somewhere down the line, again, and something we had discussed was that's something that I found worked for me. But it wasn't anything that was ever taught. It's nothing that's ever trained. I can't ever remember receiving official training where somebody stood up and said, hey, this is a way to handle a situation like this. All they ever tell you is know your authority, regurgitate your authority, call a supervisor, you know? And then they never teach the supervisors how to deal with that situation. So it's always tell the officers, know your authority, dictate your authority, call a supervisor, and then the supervisor shows up. He hasn't received any special training on how to unfuck that mess, you know? And so that was just an example, I think, kind of got us started on that conversation of the poor training that law enforcement as a whole receives in the humanity side of what it is we do for a living. How to connect with the people you're there to. Yes, we're there to police. We are there to be the enforcement edge of the law. We're there to make very, very critical decisions with little information most of the time. It's a very difficult job. So with all that, you would think that they would address it on a personal level, and they would want to train their officers how to be a human being with people, you know. And it's just not happening, you know. It's really not. And I know I only have firsthand knowledge of my agency, and I can only speak to what I receive. But I will tell you that, you know, I mean, in 23 years, especially being in special operations, we train with multiple other agencies. We always do collaboration operations, and we're working with other guys. And I got tons of friends, especially being in the CrossFit community for so long as I was. It's typically a lot of firefighters, military, law enforcement. So I have friends of dozens and dozens of agencies and departments. And it's a common criticism among our ranks that they just want to go through the numbers, go to the range and qual, go to defensive tactics and use how to deploy or learn how to use and deploy your tools, your baton, your taser, your spray, that kind of stuff. Go to the law update training classes and learn what changes have gone through when there's court decisions that affect the way we enforce our laws, right? Go learn those. And then it's get to the field, and it's like when we need when we need the advanced training, we need the sometimes unorthodox out of the box type things to see if it can be used and applied for our officers and our leadership, especially those supervisors that show up on scene,
Yeah, like a more subtle, nuanced approach to
just
individual scenarios.
It's everything. It's in our defensive tactics. We're poorly trained. It's in our human interactions, teaching tolerance, teaching mindfulness. 23 years on this gig, and I went to a leadership school last year. The first time in 23 years I've ever heard the term mindfulness in the law enforcement community. Actually taught. We had meditation classes in this leadership school.
Wow.
We had just like general lectures and discussions as a group on dealing with humanity and what it means to reach somebody. Now this was a leadership school, so a lot of it was funneled towards your followers, towards being a leader and the people within your agency that you're leading. But it's applicable across all fronts, And I remember thinking, like, God, what I could have done with this, what this could have done for my mindset as a man, as a father, as a husband. Even though I wasn't in a leadership position at work, I could have applied this on so many levels, And it just wasn't. That wasn't the culture. It just wasn't the culture. It was, you don't talk about your feelings because your feelings are irrelevant. And you don't talk about your adversary's feelings because they don't deserve your respect. You're there to do a job. It's black and white. Do your job and go home,
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting that, well, it's scary and kind of, sad that 23 years and you're only hearing it for the first time a year ago or so, but at least, there's the silver lining that you heard it a year ago. So that's a good omen, hopefully. I wanted to ask you what do you think equipped you with these tools to handle the situations like you described, that despite not being trained, like how come you have those tools and have that like kind of understanding, even though it wasn't ever explicitly trained into you by the law enforcement agencies?
It was just maturity. It was just growing. It was learning from my own mistakes, So being that officer that's like, oh yeah, and seeing how that ended up, and then realizing like, hey, maybe there's a better way. So it was just learning from my mistakes. It wasn't, it wasn't anything all that complicated. It was screwing up and then saying, I'm going to do it different next time.
So the capacity to self-reflect, essentially, is to make a mistake, or just not even make a mistake, but to have something go sideways and to take the time to look back at it and not just move on and forget about it.
Absolutely. And the biggest thing, and again, not to get off track and start getting on a personal path stuff, but there were some things in my life that put me into a place where I had no choice but to reflect and be humble and learn and grow. And it had nothing to do with work. It was all personal, but it's all intertwined, right? So that growth I had in my personal life was the foundation was humility. The foundation was vulnerability, was allowing myself to look in the mirror and say, you're fallible, you've made mistakes, you're not perfect. That is, it sounds silly, right? It seems easy. This stage of my life, it was not. I was not humble. I was not vulnerable. Vulnerability was, to me, the majority part of my life meant weakness. It meant that you were opening yourself up to exploitation, both personally and professionally. It was like I had this weird mindset of you're either a badass or you're not. and that's silly, and it caused me a lot of pain that was preventable. And so the specific stage of my career coincided with the stage of my personal life where I was growing and learning and kind of like identifying myself as a man, as a father, as everything on a personal side, as a son, as a brother, as a friend. Forget anything about work, and I didn't even realize how much it was bleeding over into my professional life. It also coincided with steps in promotion and leadership within my professional life and my career.
Coincidentally,
yeah, not by design. It just so happened, just like these steps started taken. I started slowing down as an agent and getting older and needing to, find different positions, and it just kind of happened, So, and I'm very thankful that it did, because it really helped me become a better leader. That realization, that vulnerability and humility are such valuable leadership traits, characteristics, and especially in a type A law enforcement type man, right?
Yeah.
To be vulnerable as a leader and show your followers that, hey, like, yes, I'm here to tell you what to do and I'm here to lead, but I'm also here to stand up and say, oh, that was a stupid idea. Sorry, guys. We're going to do this different next time. Like, that was unheard of when I was a young agent coming up and growing up in my agency. I never had a leader that ever owned anything to me. They were just all about redirecting, offlining, and half the time making it your fault.
Yeah.
So it's like it was this new, at least in my world, and the visibility and that I had, access to. It was a foreign thing. To be humble and vulnerable as a law enforcement officer, especially a leader, and then forget about it in the special operations community. When I ended up coming back, it was just like, you might as well be out there giving them the, like as they say, the Zen hippie Buddha bullshit. Right? Like,
yeah.
They're looking at you sideways like, who is this fucking clown? Right?
And that still kind of permeates the culture, for the most, like that this approach of like mindfulness and self-awareness, self-reflection, it still is, it sounds like it's still the exception and not the norm, right? I mean, is it still, for the most part, you still have the kind of, especially in law enforcement, the kind of machismo, walk it off, your feelings don't matter kind of approach. Like you mentioned something, and this was years and years ago, but you mentioned something about how you got into like a violent altercation that was life-threatening. Your life was in genuine danger, and like a couple days later or something like that, the extent of your therapy or the department helping you through that was essentially like, hey, you okay, or something like that. I mean, you can describe it better than me.
Yeah, clearly. So it was that it doesn't require a crazy explanation. It was, the term that was said to me was, you good, kid? And of course I'm going, yeah, I'm good. We fucked that guy up. Yeah, I'm good. And I wasn't good. I wasn't good at all. Scared the living shit out of me. That was the first time I've ever fought for my life with my hands, right? So I wasn't good, but yeah, of course my answer was, of course I'm good. Yeah, I'm good. And the reply from this person I obviously looked up to was all right, good, because there's a reason you put a gun and badge on every day. So that somehow puts me into a box. Like, that puts me into this box of, I'm not allowed to feel vulnerable, right?
Yeah, you become a machine, not a human.
Right? So as we say, there's this saying I learned in therapy when I went to therapy through this, like I mentioned earlier, this, personal hurdle I was dealing with, where it put me into that hole where I had to reflect. And my therapist one time, she called it the inventory, your emotional inventory. And so I'm sitting there very uncomfortable, and she's asking me all these questions, and we're discussing some things, and she goes, yeah, you're pretty typical. And she's laughing, and she's this short little plump lady, beautiful, beautiful human being, but she's that typical like therapist you see in a movie role, right? Like not overly attractive, and kind of frumpy, sits in this big chair where her feet barely touch the ground. It's just like, you can picture her, right?
Yeah.
Kind of that voice too, that Brent,
glasses,
you got glasses,
wearing all brown,
got tea at the desk. She's just
kind of short hair.
Yes, absolutely. And so she's, laughing, and I'm thinking, oh, I'm glad she thinks this is funny. And she goes, yep, you got 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound box. And I remember like hearing her say that too, because I'm like, what the hell did she just say? And it describes it perfectly. I had, at this time, I don't know, 17 years or something in there, and I had easily 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound box. I can't think of a better descriptor of it. It's easily visualized. It's pertinent, and it all started with that culture of, you good? Yeah, I'm good. Good. Let's get back to work, right? Take that shit, whatever that was, half a pound of shit, shove it in my box.
Put it in the box.
Hey, I'm good. It's a 5-pound box. Then the next one. And what are the patterns I'm developing? What are my coping mechanisms?
Exactly.
They are based on your foundation, right? If nobody steps in and says, that's not the way we're going to do this, there's a better way. You just keep doing what you know. Half pound at a time, I hit 5 pounds. Well, it doesn't mean that shit stops happening, right?
Exactly.
And it just so happened in my life that I got over the 5-pound limit of what my capacity was, and everybody has a different size box to deal with stuff, right? Some people are wired based on whatever happened in their life before they get into this type of work. Maybe they only have a 2-pound box. They only have enough room for 2 pounds of shit left before it starts affecting their life. Some people have a 20-pound box. They're just resilient motherfuckers that can handle shit, right? Your typical special operators in the military, those types of guys that were raised hard and have a special resilience to things.
The Jocko Willinks of the world.
Exactly. You got those guys that... But again, you got guys like Jocko, right? You mentioned him, right? The most humble dude as far as leadership goes. I've never met him, so I can't speak to him like in a personal level, but from what I know of him and what I've listened to him, he's clearly a mentor in leadership to me. He's an example of the perfect balance between vulnerability, humility, and actually strong leadership. He leads from the front. He's the first guy to be able to say, like, this is what we're going to do. This is why we're going to do it. Everybody know their job? Cool, go. And then at the AAR, he's going, all right, so that completely fucking went sideways. And it was my fault. I'm sorry I told you guys to do that. That was a bad idea. Now I know why. How are we going to do it better next time, right? Perfect balance of humility and vulnerability. So as I start hitting my 5-pound limit and my box is full and I'm barely functioning, I'm not sleeping, I'm having anxiety, I'm not healthy, I'm not doing the things that I know help me deal with that type of shit. I don't even have the resilience and motivation to do the minimum of like just PT, for an example. 10 years, I always PT'd. Even if it was like, I don't have any time, only have 20 minutes, I'd go for a 15-minute run and do calisthenics or whatever, shower, and then off to whatever I had to do.
And PT is physical training.
Physical training,
for
right?
those who don't know.
Right. So no one needs to explain, no one needs to justify or defend the benefits of physical training for the entire health of a body, right? The mind, the soul, the physical, everything. It's critical towards being a healthy human being. I stopped finding the time and the motivation to even do that in my off-duty hours. I wasn't sleeping well. I was drinking more. I was irritable all the time. I was very frustrated, very angry, and it was 100% my own fault and my poor coping mechanisms. And then it just so happens, right? So what does that type of man do? Starts driving those close to him away, starts creating tension in his personal relationships, which just creates more shit to put in the box, right? And then more things happening at work that were relatively significant. And that box just piled up, boiled over, and my world just, in my perspective, just exploded. The
shit just spilled over,
right?
Got all over everything.
And it was so unnecessary, right? I mean, really look back and think about it. If we take our public servants on all levels, I don't want to just say law enforcement. If we take our first responders, our trauma surgeons, the people that work in the ERs that see this stuff every day, right? They're the receiving end of these byproducts of all of our messes in the field. We take those people and we really give them the time, and we tell them, we think this is so important. We're going to pay you to go learn it. You know, I'm going to use our funds to make sure that you have the tools, should you choose to implement them, to deal with these types of things. And you can use that on all levels, whether it's the defensive tactics training, it's the firearms training, it's the psychological type stuff to de-escalate situations like I used the example for. It's the training on how to process those adverse situations that happen and how to recognize them and discuss them and talk about them, because that keeps you from shoving it in that box, right? So we all have different boxes inside of us. They all have a capacity limit, but if I take a traumatic situation that happens to me at work and I process it and talk about it and show vulnerability and admit to the fact that it affected me and it's hurting me, and I'm discussing it, it may have started as a pound of shit, but discussing it and talking about it and being vulnerable and going to the others who I respect and saying, hey man, that fucked me up. Like just saying that to another man in the same field, saying that fucked me up and I don't feel right. Let's talk about it. I want your opinion on this. Going to your wife when you get home and saying, I feel weak and vulnerable, crying, holding them, saying that sucked. What I had to see last night, no one should have to see, but I had to fucking deal with it. Just having that discussion with somebody you trust turns that pound of shit, just discussing it, I would say, turns it into half pound. Cuts it in half. So worst case scenario, just showing humility and vulnerability and admitting the fact that it affected you, you're still throwing it in your box. But instead of a pound, it's a half pound. And if you even take further things like, hey, you know what? I'm going to go talk to the therapist and bring that up next week. I'm going to make an appointment and I'm going to go talk to Dr. Lee. And I'm going to talk to her about how that affected me. And she's going to give me some cool homework and some tools to do to really deal with this. Now that half pound goes to cut it by another half. You know, it's never going to be nothing. You're never going to be able to therapy it away. You can't talk it away. You can't make it not happen. This line of work, you're putting shit in your box. But it's up to you what tools you can implement and what kind of man you want to be able to decide how much weight you put in it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think that's so important to hear from somebody like you who's been doing this for 20 plus years, 30 plus years now. How many years have you been?
About 23 and a half.
23 and a half. So 23 and a half years, you've worked your way up to a leadership position now where you have the unique opportunity to start kind of, maybe not yet, maybe not ever, but it sounds like you're kind of doing things here and there to bring this kind of mentality to your squad. And then maybe either they'll move up one day or you'll move up. Somebody will end up moving up who then takes that mentality further and then kind of disperses it into a wider array of I'm losing the word here, like departments and positions and stuff like that. Because I think one thing that, I mean, there's an argument to be had about things like police reform and stuff like that. Like for sure there needs to be some level of change, like we've just kind of been discussing this whole time. But a big part of a big change that I think should happen is that a lot of people, whether they're the ones outside the situation judging, or they're the actual supervisors or the ones who are actually working the job, they can fall into this falsehood of thinking that the guys who sign up, or gals, the guys and gals that sign up for this job are just these machines who don't have this concept of, who shouldn't be beholden to this concept of a box or this or that, because it's your job. It's what you get paid to do. Yeah. And you know, kind of bring it back to the whole every fight is a gunfight. Maybe I didn't even ever think of that because I'm so outside of it, I don't even think about it. And maybe there are some people who are inside of the field who just genuinely don't think about it either, but there must be some kind of subconscious understanding, even if it's not explicitly stated to you or realized that, like, yeah, my life is at stake every interaction I go into. And the kind of toll that has on a human being is so underappreciated, I feel like, in our society, because we hold these law enforcement officers, whether they're border patrol, police officers, whatever, soldiers, we expect to put them in these extreme situations and have these almost superhuman, unrealistic ability to cope, to stay calm, to de-escalate, to think under intense amounts of pressure. Yeah. And that's, I mean, it's easy for me to say from the outside, especially when I'm not, on the other side experiencing things like oppression, police brutality, stuff like that, all of which I think needs to be addressed. But I do think that I'm hoping that as a whole, we take this as an opportunity to kind of pay attention to things like the mental health and the toll that mentally that this takes on the men and women who are in uniform, because they do it for us. They do it for our benefit. We are the ones who benefit, our safety, our peace of mind. The common person, the common citizen, is the one who reaps the benefits of the suffering and the sacrifices that these men and women have to make. Yeah, no, that was well said. It was well said. I would add a little bit to the, like you mentioned, we don't, or you said you personally don't have the perspective. You've never had that exposure to like what it must be like to have to deal with these intense environments, right? And I hope I don't. So think about it in this way too, and this is something I've heard mentioned a couple of times by different guests on different podcasts I've listened to, coming from a law enforcement background, and they always say it's not the known, it's the unknown, right? Mm-hmm. So just the basic training that an officer gets with the technology, the access to the technology that we have in these days. So we have different things like the simulators, right? They are so incredibly real. I remember the first time I had exposure to a simulator. It was like a second, third generation version, Border Patrol. Do you remember what year it was? I don't. I probably had at least 10 years in it this time. So I remember I went to Defensive Tactics one day and they had got it. I was friends with a lot of those guys, that ran the Defensive Tactics shop. So like we'd show up from Special Operations to go pick up ammunition or something, because that's where our main armory was, or pick up toys for our weapons. We get new optics or something, and we'd always up there at Defensive Tactics grabbing shit from these guys. And one day we went up there and they go, "Hey, we got the new simulator. You guys want to try it out?" And I go, "Hell yeah, let's go see what it's up." It's like a video game, right? No way, man. This thing is not quite 360. I don't even remember the degrees, but I mean, you had a little bit behind you to the right, a little bit behind you to the left in this interactive screen, right? And they're obviously predetermined with actors in the screen, and so this guy like, shows like VR? Up. Or is it AR? AR being that you physically move around. It's not VR. You physically move around, and you don't have any goggles or anything like that. So you have a gun belt that they give you that's wired. You have a gun that they give you that's wired to the system. The only thing this generation of the one I had, which I know they have now, where you can go to your tools and they're also connected to the environment that you're operating in. Wow. This one was just firearm, and but you also had to wear a vest, and so this vest had electrodes, and so if you didn't act fast enough and like edge weapon fights and different kind of things and shoot scenarios, it would simulate either getting shot or getting stabbed. Wow. And it would shock you and make you react. And I remember the first time I did it, like my heart was pounding out of my chest. This whole thing is a fucking video. It's like watching a movie, playing a video game. My heart is just thump, 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 thump. And I had not quite an adrenaline dump, but I remember like getting that edge feel, like, and like, so when I was done, I went through 3 or 4 scenarios, and of course all the guys are laughing because it's not an official training day. We're all laughing at one another and teasing each other. Yeah. They're not really looking at it as training. They were just laughing at us because we were getting stabbed and too slow out of the holster and shit. And they were ribbing you a little bit. Of course, I got shot by some chick with big tits. Like it was a fake vehicle stop. Like, so you're talking to her and she's like, "Oh, officer, oh my gosh, I dropped my ID," and she's got these big boobs, no bra, and you're just kind of like, "Hey," and she comes up with a revolver and shoots you in the face. Wow. And you're like, "Ah," and you pull your gun and start blowing her away. It's like one of those. It's that cheesy, right? But
pertinent. So
Sounds intense.
we're all joking around. And still, even though it was not a real training day, I'm not feeling pressure. I remember like getting worked up. You know what I mean? And so the technology now today is 10 times that intense. Like they have these full body suits that officers wear. They can use batons and tasers and spray, and all of it's interactive with those scenarios. And you can bring in multiple officers and do 2 officers on multiple subject encounters. There's all sorts of stuff you can do now with the technology these days. So with that, right? So this is at the academy level. These guys have never hit the street. They've never been in a real world encounter as a police officer, as a law enforcement officer. But yet, in their mind, they might as well have, right? So imagine the feeling. Imagine the nervousness when they do their first traffic stop at 2:30 in the morning by themselves. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, that they know more or less how far away the next guy is to help them, right? Mm-hmm. So you are I don't know, let's say you just got off your FTU, so you've had your journeyman officers been showing you the ropes, and they blessed you. Yes, you're ready to go out on the street. You're by yourself. And you do your first traffic stop. And you got 3 guys in the car. You can see 3 heads in the car, and they look like hardcore dudes. They're in an area known for fill in the blank, but it ain't good, right? Mm-hmm. And you're by yourself, and you make that first traffic stop. There's nothing that suggests that there's going to be a violent encounter. There's nothing that says, hey, this is what you need to be geared up for. You need to be a professional law enforcement officer, be respectful. You need to approach that vehicle and figure out what's going on, right? There's a reason you're stopping these guys. In the back of your mind, guaranteed, if you're worth a shit as an officer, in the back of your mind is going to be every single bad simulator scenario you went to where you got shot, where you didn't see the gun when you were supposed to, when you didn't react accordingly, and you got that little zap in your nipples by the suit. You know what I'm saying? Like you remember what it's like to get shot wearing that simulator suit, and you had to react, and you got your ass chewed by your officers, by the training officers at the DTAC place, telling you, oh, you fucked this up, Cruz. What the hell are you doing? You're going to get yourself killed and all that. And you go over and over and over again until you get it right, right?
Yeah.
Even though you've never stopped anybody as an officer and got into a fight for your life or got into a shootout, in the back of your mind, you're walking up to that car, and I guarantee you, if you're worth a shit as an officer, your heart's pounding out of your chest, you're nervous, you're scared. Nothing has happened. Nothing has happened. Mm-hmm. For all we know, these 3 guys fell asleep at a Bible study, and they're all Jehovah's Witness that were out trying to convince all these dudes in the hood to go with the Lord and be a Mormon or whatever.
Yeah,
and
late night at the office.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You're walking up to that car thinking, this is the day I die. Mm-hmm. Or this is the day I send someone else to their maker. Mm-hmm. So that times, I don't know, let's just use a 30-day time frame. Let's just say that times 20 over the longevity of a career. The physiological response to what your body is doing when you walk up to that car, that's cortisol. It's what the body does with stress, right? Which is why they always say stress is such a big deal in everyone's life. Forget about being a cop or a firefighter or first responder. Any job. When you experience severe stress and it elevates your heart rate and causes that physiological response to stress, everybody reacts to it differently. Doesn't matter. You are getting a chemical dumped into your bloodstream. And over prolonged time, it is detrimental to the longevity of your life. It just is. It's been proven. It's been studied. Routine cortisol is bad. This is what officers are dealing with every single day, every single night. When you're being stopped, you may know that you're not a threat. You might be annoyed. You're like pissed off. You're like, fuck, dude, I just got a speeding ticket 2 weeks ago. I barely had enough money to pay my rent. What am I going to do? Mm-hmm. Right? You're having a physiological response to stress because you know you're about to get a speeding ticket because you're doing 90 down the freeway. Mm-hmm. And you know that chippy's not going to let you off. And you're just like, fuck. Well, the cop's walking up to your car and going, I wonder if this is a guy that's going to try to kill me and take my kid's father away from me tonight.
Yeah.
Every single stop. So you got it once, or you got it twice in a month because you got 2 speeding tickets and you're feeling the stress. This guy, think of how many stops he's done.
Every day.
Every day. Same feeling, same physiological response.
Mm-hmm.
And God help you if you get numb to it because you're still dealing with it and it's just jacking you up even worse because you're not even recognizing it's happening.
Yeah. And that is why I think it's so important to hear the perspectives of people like yourself, Jocko Willink, name your law enforcement representative who goes on and talks about these things, because I hear so much about how it's so easy to criticize the police, especially when something goes sideways. Like you see a video of, there's too many videos to even keep up with, but you see, an officer, a fatal shooting by an officer on somebody who looks like they were just trying to run away or wasn't a threat or whatever. But what you don't see is the thing that didn't happen, that could have happened. What you see is the officer shooting the person. You're like, that's wrong. That guy messed up. They hang his head on a stick.
Mm-hmm.
But what you don't see is that if he hadn't done that, him getting knocked unconscious and the weapon taken from him, maybe shot by his own weapon to death. And now you have a violent criminal, a murderer with a police officer's weapon, free to roam, to run away now. And what I'm not trying to discredit or, say that there aren't things like unjustified shootings, but I'm saying that from we have this thing going on in society where we're like, law enforcement officers need to understand it from the perspective of the citizen. It's like they're just these heartless robots who don't get what it's like to be humanitarian. It's like, but we don't have the same thing on the citizens. We don't try to tell our citizens, well, think about what it's like from their perspective. We expect them to be able to think about what it's like from the myriad of perspectives of the various people they come across all day, every day. But we're not supposed to imagine what it's like to be in that position, to have your life potentially in danger, to be that stressed out, to have that kind of cortisol, this, that, and the other going on. So,
well, I would say to that, we should be held to a higher standard. So it is not a reasonable expectation to expect the citizens in which we serve to meet us at our level. We asked for that.
True.
I asked for it. Nobody came to my door and said, hey, dude, guess what? You don't get to be an iron worker next month. You're going to be a Border Patrol agent. You have no say-so. I begged. I banged on the door to get into this. I asked for the crazy scrutiny of an FBI background investigation. Sweated a little in an FBI background investigation. Like I said, I landed at Vanguard Steel where the land of misfits came to work.
Yeah.
So there were some interesting conversations where I was a little nervous. So it's like I asked for that. They didn't come ask me to do it. We as law enforcement officers and public servants in general ask for that standard of conduct that we don't expect of the general public. There's plenty of jobs I can go do and make a living for my family and do whatever the hell I want without the scrutiny of superiors or of policy and procedure, right? I'm trying to think of an example of something that recreational drug use, even legal recreational drug use. Marijuana is legal in the state of California. I can't use weed. I can't even use CBD as a Border Patrol agent. Something that's been proven. It's been proven to help with specific issues I have. I deal with depression and anxiety from a traumatic brain injury. It's my body's physiological response to injuring my brain in an on-duty accident. And CBD could help me with that. And instead, the service would like to stand their ground and say, no, weed's bad. You can't do CBD, even though I'm not going to use any psychoactive material in the CBD, no THC.
And can they test
just
for CBD?
Well, the problem is the market doesn't have FDA filtering, for lack of better terms.
Regulation.
So what happens is they went and did a test. So in the defense of my agency, not to get off topic, but real quick. In the defense of my agency, they looked and said, okay, this is obviously not at what it used to be. The general public is looking at marijuana in general very differently. It's not that big a deal. Let's look at this CBD issue. What started it was they were doing a lot of drug testing, and a lot of people were failing the drug test. And guess what they were saying they were using?
CBD.
CBD. I'm not smoking weed. I'm not using pot. I'm using CBD. There's no THC, but they're pissing dirty. So the service went and they did a screening, and they took a whole bunch of sample products from the open market. They purchased them. They went and they specifically took products that claimed, I believe it was 0.03 THC or less guaranteed. And they tested all of them for a baseline. And even within the specific companies and manufacturers of the CBD, it was all over the map. So I believe it was 7 out of 10 had incredibly traceable amounts of THC in their CBD in upwards of 3%.
Wow.
So this is a company this is Brent Barber CBD telling you, hey man, use my product. It'll do wonders for you.
No psychoactive
And you
effects.
go, no psychoactive effects, no THC, I'm good to use this? Absolutely. And you use it, and it turns out maybe one bottle didn't have any. The next bottle you bought had almost 3% THC in it. And then you get a surprise piss test at work. You piss dirty, and you go, oh man, you cry foul, right?
Yeah.
The issue there is there's nobody holding these companies accountable for the validity of their claims. So the agency came back and said, CBD, no go. We don't have control over the FDA. We don't have control over the manufacturers. And we're certainly not going to invest in a product that can guarantee untraceable amounts of THC. So CBD is a no-go. And they made it against policy.
Gotcha.
So they considered it. But unfortunately, because the market is so new and it's in this growth period and all that, again, who fucking cares? So I use CBD that has 3% THC. Come on. I'm not getting high off that. I'm not going to be sitting here taking my couple of drops of CBD to help with my anxiety.
And tripping
and
out.
then go, oh, here we go. Turn it into some fucking acid test.
Yeah, getting the munchies.
Like, stop, right? So maybe I get a little sleepy or something like, oh man, I think there might have been some THC in that one. It's ridiculous to even use that as an argument, but it's in the policy. So how did we get off track? Well,
We were talking about you took on the responsibility by signing up for that job and
right, the public and their interpretation
being
of
held to a
right.
higher standard.
So yeah, it's basically that. We are and we should be held to a higher standard. But I'll use an example. So I kind of brought up that, you're making a traffic stop and you walk up to an encounter and you don't know where this is going to go. I can all but guarantee that every horrible law enforcement interaction that was videotaped and saw and is causing outrage in our communities, if you could have hit pause right at the encounter time. So in other words, traffic stop, right when the cop gets out of the car and starts walking up to the car, you could hit pause and I could grab that officer and go, this dude's going to pull a gun. Go. It would end in an acceptable law enforcement resolution and nobody would get hurt. Or I could say, hey, you're going to talk to this guy for 25 minutes? I'll use the Atlanta PD shooting in the Wendy's drive-thru. If I could have hit pause and walked up to that officer before he ever went to go talk to him and do the DUI test, the sobriety test, and said, as soon as you go to put cuffs on this guy, he's going to fight. He's going to fight like hell. He's going to get one of your tasers, and he's going to run. And then hit go, and just implanted that in that cop's mind, it would have ended very differently. So what is the factor there that we are asking our officers to do that's affecting these negative resolutions in these interactions? It's the unknown. That is what we battle as a trade. It is the unknown. And you can apply that to all sorts of crafts, right? A trauma doctor, an MD in an ER level 3 trauma center. That guy goes to work every day, drinks his coffee, says goodbye to his family, and he goes to work, puts on his kit, and he gets out there on the floor, and he has no idea what that shift expects of him, right? So let's say he gets a gunshot victim, and he's trying to assess the injuries as fast as he can, and it turns out the last bullet wound that he assesses is the actual one with the heavy arterial bleed, and it's the one that this dude is bleeding out from, and it takes him 12 minutes to get to it. to be able to get the ultrasounds to figure out where the bleed's coming from. Had he chose that one first out of the 4 bullet wounds this guy had, he would have addressed it accordingly. The dude would have lived, but because he chose it last, the guy bled out and he died, and now we have a victim that's dead instead of alive.
And a doctor who, if they're, have a conscience, they're probably tearing themselves up about it. They're probably feel horror, this crushing guilt that, well, if I had just picked if I picked the right hole instead of the wrong one.
Exactly, right? What if I could have hit pause right as that dude was getting wheeled in off the air ambulance, getting wheeled into the trauma ER, and he's getting the hand down from the medics and everything on what the situation is and the vitals, and he starts going to work on this guy. What if I could have hit pause and said, "Hey, it's the thigh wound, the one that's going to kill him. Forget about the 2 in the arm and the abdomen and all that kind of stuff, and hit the one in the thigh. Go." Dude's alive, right? We don't have that. That's never going to exist. We don't have that luxury. We just don't have it. So what you end up with is a whole lot of variables that are based on split-second decisions, and guess what? Sometimes they're fucking wrong. They're dead wrong. And I guarantee you that officer in Atlanta is watching that video and just going, oh, he knows what he was thinking. And I'll tell you right now, I'm not going to judge that guy. I'm not going to judge that guy. We have 2 eyes and a brain just like every other citizen in this country. We see what we see, we process that information, and we make decisions based on that information. It's like an easy analogy is you're coming up to an intersection. This has happened to me multiple times. I come up to an intersection, light turns yellow. Perfect example, right? How many seconds do you have to decide if you're going to punch it or hit the brakes? Less than 1 for most of us if we're sober and of sound mind and not distracted by a bunch of other shit in the car. The light turns yellow and you go, oh shit, I can make it, or and you hit the brakes.
Yeah.
I have made the choice to hit the brakes and slowed down, and somebody flew through the fucking intersection. And I've went like, oh my God. If I didn't stop, I would have been T-boned, right? It's the perfect analogy. Sometimes officers hit the gas instead of the brakes. And they're making very, very critical split-second decisions with the information that they have in front of them. And they don't have the luxury of watching it on tape and rewinding it and watching it again and going, see? That's why that was a bad shooting. That's not how real life works.
Yeah. Not till after the fact.
Not till after the fact. And then let's throw in the fact that this guy was already rolling around with that guy on the ground for 30, 45 seconds, and they lost. So if you want to know the adrenaline that was pumping through that cop's veins, and then you got the entire training progression of that guy's whole career where we tell them, you don't lose, you're not allowed to lose, every fight's a gunfight, right? All that shit is still said today. You're not allowed to lose because if you lose, you're dead. You want your kids to be orphaned? Go ahead and lose a fight, motherfucker. Like, I've heard that said to me before. Hey, Brent, hey, Barber, you got kids? Yeah, I got a kid, sir. You want to leave that kid without a daddy? Well, no, sir. Well, then you better fucking step it up. Like, I've heard PT instructors say that to me. So where do you think my head is when I'm rolling around in the parking lot of a Wendy's with another officer and I'm losing? You think my head is, oh, go hide in the bushes or take cover or get behind a car? Oh, he's got a taser. Let me run the other direction.
Or he probably won't do anything. I'll just let him go.
Yeah, it's not. No, we get in that mindset. Right? We always fall back on our training, and I should say we always fall back on the level of our training. Right? To quote Jocko, we fall back on the level of our training, and we have to be real about what that level is, and it's not great. It is not great. There is so much room for improvement. So you have less than adequate training. You don't have enough of it. Even though it's not adequate, there's not enough of it. And you have all the stresses and you have the adrenaline going through that cop's vein, and he made a mistake. And a man lost his life over what? Because he was drunk, because he was driving drunk. Now, the other side of that argument, hey man, all it was is a DUI. Why didn't the guy just own it? There's a lot of different sides to this thing that you can say, but the bottom line was mistakes were made on all front. you know?
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy to armchair quarterback it and look back and say, like, well, it's this simple. It's this easy. Like you said, we want to look at our cops and say, they should be infallible. They volunteered to be a cop and wear a badge and a gun, go out there and police us. They shouldn't be allowed to make these types of mistakes that cost people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
That's your opinion. You're entitled to that opinion, as a taxpayer. And you're entitled to be angry and enraged and protest and all of those things. I 100% support all of that. That's you. That's the way you're reacting to this situation and you want change. You should be given that right to do it. But you also have to be tolerant and understanding of the fact that there's other people with different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
So,
or even should be. You don't have to be, because that's when you say you have to be tolerant. It's like, well, no, I don't. It's like, well, you should be. Is because it's just going to be better for you and everyone involved.
Right.
Because there's so much. I just feel like there's so much going on, even outside of just the law enforcement. There's the law enforcement, the COVID-19, name this or that. But I feel like there's such and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm like painting the past with like a rose-colored brush or whatever you want to call it, however that phrase works. But I feel like we have this new thing where like we used to. I feel culturally we used to agree more or less on what was right or wrong, and the more obvious it was something was right or wrong, the more we agreed on it. And I feel like as social media becomes a bigger thing, we're kind of going into our own little like subcultures, echo chambers. It's like we agree on less and less and less about what is right and what is wrong. And like you can lay out that argument right there about acknowledge all the places where the citizens are right and acknowledge where there could be improvement in the law enforcement and where the law enforcement officers were at fault, and then say, but you should also have a little bit of tolerance or patience with this or that. It's like, no, I don't. Nuh-uh. And like there's no they don't have a rational argument. They don't have like a rational reason or argument why you're wrong. It's just that I just think you're wrong, or I just think I don't have to do that. I don't think that I should have the responsibility as a citizen to be patient and understanding with our law enforcement officers. Well, they should have that responsibility for me to a superhuman degree. They should have superhuman calm and understanding, but I don't have to have any. And that's where this whole thing of like personal responsibility kind of comes into it, where I'm a strong believer in personal responsibility, and I'm by no means perfect. I fuck up all the time, and there are times when I was like, man, that thing that I was personally responsible for, I let that go, I messed that up, and I'm personally responsible for that. But I feel like there's like a societal cultural shift now where more and more the buck of personal responsibility is just being passed, and it doesn't stop anywhere. You're never responsible. Oh, this happened to you, that's oppression. Or this happened to you, that was victimization. This is a result of your parents or your socioeconomic background or your race or your gender or the teachers you had, the neighborhood you grew up in, what have you. And I mean, what would you say to a person like that? Like, and not just to say something to them, but like, how would you try to genuinely open the eyes of somebody who has them shut so tight when it comes to their personal responsibility? And like, you could just to give a concrete example, like the whole DUI thing. Like you said, like there's the other side of the argument. It's like, why don't you just deal with it? Like it's a DUI, you committed a crime, just don't resist or whatever and own up to it. It's like, well, I have family, they're relying on me, I don't want to go to jail, I don't want to lose all our money, leave them destitute, this or that. And like there's a good argument for it, sure, but how do you, and this is something that reason I'm asking is because I'm interested in it. How do you convince people to embrace their personal responsibility in situations like this, especially when you're dealing with a person who doesn't want to do that?
That's a good question. First off, I to fall back on the humility side of things, I'm certainly not qualified to be that guy, and I never hold myself to that level. So I get asked questions all the time about work and what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And there's plenty of times where I go, look, it's all I can do to just stay in my lane and keep functioning. I guess if I was to give it a lot of thought, I would suggest exposure. That old saying, walk a mile in their shoes. And I have some discretion, I guess, to offer some of that exposure in the form of ride-alongs or spend the day with me or come down, let me give you a tour. Let me show you what it's like. Come to one of our training days and observe what these guys go through just in a training day and the stress that's induced. And other than that, I mean, I don't know that I'm comfortable like answering that question with real thought to be able to stand on my answer without giving that more time to really think of that.
Gotcha. And that's one of the things that I appreciate is
because that's deep.
That's a wise answer, though.
It's just deep, man. And then you have all the individual factors that are specific to that person, their history, their experience, their life experience, their interactions with law enforcement. I mean, there's so many things that are added to the recipe that create our perception of things, right? I mean, it's just that's a tough one. It's almost another conversation in itself. Sure.
Well, we'll save it for the next episode I have you on.
Yeah.
You can think about it in your free time. But what I actually really, you had the thought came to you pretty quick as far as walking the mile in your shoes. What are your thoughts on the countries, or at least the policies that some countries have, where like it's required when you turn 18 that you serve like a year in the military, or I don't know if there are any countries that you have to be law enforcement, but I know there are certain countries that require you to be a part of that. Do you think that's something, whether or not it's realistic, because that's a whole other conversation, but do you think that's something that the United States would benefit from?
Absolutely. And that's something I've given a lot of thought to. And it's actually my counter argument to the Bernie Sanders type concepts of, as they like to say, as Caleb will say, we've had many conversations about free education, right? And I just laugh and get frustrated and tell them, saying, nothing's free. Somebody's paying, right?
Mm-hmm. Tinstoffel.
So if we're going to make it free and we're going to make it taxpayer funded, I think that the taxpayers should get something in return. And I think that's an easy lift. I wouldn't say military per se, but I think it should be tiered. So you graduate high school and you are starting your junior year, you're evaluated by some process that kind of starts identifying what your future is going to hold, right? We can pretty much tell around your junior year in high school if you're going to be a physicist or a engine builder or a farmer. We may not have it pinpointed perfectly, but let's be honest, like there's not a whole lot of people that make this crazy 180 turn out of high school and just go a different direction.
You can roughly tell whether someone has the potential to be a physicist or a fry cook. You can tell between those two.
Right. So I didn't want to go to the fry cook side, and there's nothing against, we need fry cooks.
Oh yeah, nothing wrong. I work in a restaurant.
And we need people that are passionate about what it is they're doing, and that's something to be proud of. It doesn't matter what it is. If you're going to be a fry cook, be the best fucking fry cook on the planet, or at least strive to be, and you have my 100% respect. Or be whatever else and be the best. As long as you're pouring your heart into it and you take pride in it, I support it 100%. So if it was up to me, I would take these guys in their junior year, the students, and I would say, okay, let's start steering you in a direction, knowing that when you graduate high school, you go into 2 years of public service. Now, public service can be a lot of things. It can be like internships in government, local government. It can be military. It can be social services. Whatever it is mandatory. It's 2 years, and you get the exposure of what it's like to see how the system is run and to serve your fellow man and support your country.
Yeah, and what's really not to cut you off, but I just wanted to, before I forgot, that what sounds really interesting about that is the idea of having, like you said, tiers and having multiple options. It's almost like the more options you have to offer to people, and the more diverse those options are, as long as they still fall under the umbrella of public service. Right. They're not only going to get like the experience, but they're going to be developing skills. They're going like if they have the wider the range, the wider of opportunities for jobs to start off with, the wider the range of temperaments that you are being accessible to. So say you have somebody who's not a type A. They're probably not going to be a law enforcement or a military kind of person, but they can be a healthcare worker or a social worker. And then they're learning in that process of that 2 years, like, wow, I really like this. Or they even learn, wow, I fucking hate this. I cannot be a social worker. So
perspective. It's free perspective. It's free exposure. So you do your 2 years of public service, and then you decide, you know what, I really like this. I really like the military. And they choose a path into the military. Or they, like, let's say they wanted to get in the medical field, and they do some public service work in the medical field, probably in the military, being in the medic side and the medical care side. And then they go, I really like this. I want to pursue this. The government picks up the tab for your education, and off you go into the world. Here you go. There's your free education. Yes, it's taxpayer funded. We're eliminating student debt, which I'm intimately familiar with. You are taking that burden off them. That decision-making process is gone. They're not thinking, well, if I go to college, my parents are going to have to go $100,000 in debt, or I'm going to have to pay this, or I'm going to have to work 2 jobs to go to college. It's like,
and if I don't go to college, I'm going to be a loser my whole life.
Exactly. You do your 2 years, you get your perspective. Do you want to further your education? The government's going to pay for it. Do you want to go into a trade? The government's going to pay for your trade school, electrician, air conditioning, whatever it is. And you offer that advanced education in the field that they want to do, as long as they're upholding their end of the bargain. They're doing their service in good standing and good character. So,
Yeah, I like that. I again, it's a whole other conversation for a different podcast at this point, because we're running low on time. But I don't know about the realisticness of bringing that kind of concept to America, but I do think that the more we talk about it, the more realistic it becomes. Doesn't mean it will become possible, but it becomes more possible. So I like that. I actually am very interested in kind of pursuing, especially in my lifetime, my children's stuff, like where we could go as a country in that regard. Our family just got home, so there might be some background noise here. We're going to cut it off soon because we're running low on time. But before we go, I wanted to run something by you, just because it kind of tied into what we just made me think of it. I have a thought that, I don't think I've ever unveiled it before. So big reveal here. I have an original idea, and it's probably a bad one. So feel free to tear it apart in the comments or Brent here. But part of me, and now, sorry, I'm all over the place, but I'm at a stage in my life where I'm a very anti-big government kind of guy. Just because the more it's explained to me, the more it makes sense that most of the time, and I don't mean abolish the federal government. It's there for a reason. But I think the bigger and bigger and bigger it gets, the more likely it is to collapse under its own weight because it's too big. But I want to bounce this off of you. A thought that I had a long time ago when I still was pro big government, and I thought that big government could come in and solve problems. A concept I had was the idea of a society where every single citizen, like by default, by de facto, if you are a citizen, you have the right to take a job as an employee of the government. So, I'll explain it. Kind of ties in with the idea of kind of a universal basic income. Well, how can we give people universal basic income if they're not producing anything? Because they're not producing anything to generate revenue. So how can we take revenue and give it to them without that revenue disappearing and crashing the economy and creating, a crashed system? Well, what if you don't just get that basic income to do nothing? You're getting that income because it's your job to be an educated citizen. So it is your job to read articles, to take history classes, to learn about economics, and you can specialize in this or that, but there would be some kind of like periodic either testing, but testing sounds kind of like it could go awry. So maybe even just vote like you don't get if you don't vote in this election or that election, you are now forfeiting your universal basic income. It is your job to be a government. Every single citizen.
So basically, to be engaged.
Yeah,
it is in the process.
Exactly.
In all aspects.
Exactly. It would be some kind of, and this is where, because one of the things that in my recent years here has made me kind of steer away from the big government ideas, that a lot of it is idealistic. A lot of it is unrealistically idealistic, utopian thinking that does not take into account the flaws of human nature and just the reality of human nature. But what if you could actually incentivize people who otherwise wouldn't care about reading, wouldn't care about what's going on, wouldn't care about the economy or educating themselves. Because the reason this couldn't be a thing before is we didn't have things like the internet and Google and things and instant information that was just accessible all the time to everyone. But now we do. So what if we could have? Because I love the Constitution. I don't want to scrap the Constitution or scrap the system that America is founded upon, but rather modifying it and changing it so that citizens are incentivized and rewarded to participate in the process, rather than, it just being kind of thing that like, well, you should, but if you don't vote, nothing happens. So do whatever you want to do. I mean, I don't want to, we got to go, and I'm kind of ranting, so I don't want to keep going, but there's a lot more to that thought. I have it written down somewhere, but I'll leave it there. I just want to get your thoughts on it.
I like the concept in some ways. I've listened to Andrew Yang speak 2 or 3 times, and I've listened to his long-form discussions on his concept of universal basic income. I like it on face value. I also have some things that I'd say, but I have a lot of buts with that concept, but I like it on its face value. I like your concept. I think there's a way to apply it that could be accepted. You brought up the voting. I'll ask you this. What if you voted, every time you voted in an election, no matter what it was, whether it was your local, like city council members, school board, all the way up to the president of the United States, what if you got a $20 Starbucks gift card?
Then people would come and be like...
literally, dude, just you vote. They determine you're a valid voter. You've turned in your ID. And you cast your vote and you come out. Instead of getting a fucking stupid sticker that ends up on light poles and everything else that says, I voted, you got a $20 Starbucks gift card. Or even if it was only $10. It's just one drink at Starbucks. Do you think that would bring people to the polls? And if so, in what numbers? As far as double what we see now, triple what we see now? What do you think?
I definitely think, I don't know about doubling or tripling because I don't know the numbers, but definitely think it would increase the numbers.
It's less than half right now in presidential elections.
It would definitely increase the numbers because people will do anything. A certain number of people will do something that they otherwise wouldn't have done, as long as it's not too hard, just because they're getting something free. It could be a free piece of trash, but they're getting something for free, so they're willing to do it.
Well, they clearly don't do it for the sticker. And that's something free. So you know what I'm saying? So I think
that's
stepping
true.
it up for a Starbucks card. I think
that's true. I like the idea. I know it's mainly kind of like jovial, but my first thought is like, well, then you're going to have people like, what about this? This has created a Starbucks industrial complex. Now we got the government making.
So Antifa's not going to vote because they don't want to support Starbucks.
Yeah, probably something. Or there'd be some kind of like, well, what is Starbucks really just coffee, or are they making vaccines now?
I'm strangely okay with that. Strangely okay with Antifa stepping out the elections.
Maybe selling you a venti vaccinachino.
Yeah.
I'd like to get into that in more detail because I haven't actually thought about that concept in a while. So I want to revisit it.
Well, it falls in line with your theory, right?
The Starbucks?
Right. So you're utilizing taxpayer funded programs to encourage engagement in being a citizen of the country, all of the things that goes along with being a citizen. Voting, in my opinion, the biggest one, right?
Yeah.
But also staying informed,
which they should go hand in hand, staying informed and voting.
You'd like to think so, but
yeah.
So it falls in line with the concept, so that's why I was curious, just to piecemeal it out and just say, well, let's use this little example of voting, and using incentives to do it. What your opinion was. So.
Well, if anything, if you just take the Starbucks part out of it and just make it a $20 gift card,
there you go.
That a Visa gift card that you can use at Starbucks, or you can use it at Albertsons. That's actually, I like that. But then the problem I think is that there's no, and this is where it's like, well, maybe you test them, but tests can be, some people aren't good test takers, yada yada. But it's like, there has to be a way to prove, or to the best of our ability, because you're always going to have people who cheat the system and forge this or that. But we have to have a way, if this were to happen, to prove that you actually did your homework, that you actually read the history book, did the supplemental reading, watched the video lecture, yada, yada, yada. Because here's the thing is, in this system that I'm suggesting, we don't abolish trade, or the government doesn't come in and now own everything like in a communistic or socialist, communist, fascist society.
Just the specific things that apply to being an engaged citizen as far as your relationship with the government activities.
Well, we would add in this system, and again, it's not perfect. I haven't thought it all the way through, but they would basically take the system that we have now that has, free trade, independently owned businesses, corporations, mom and pop shops, all those things, you still have the option to do that. You still have the option. In fact, you also have the option to be paid to be an informed citizen who educates themselves, reads, and votes. You can get that. You can qualify for getting universal basic income by meeting said requirements. You can choose not to, but now you've disqualified yourself from universal basic income. But you still have the option to also run a business. So you can either only run a business as a way of making a living. You can only be a government citizen. But again, keep in mind, now you're limiting the amount of money that you can make. You can only get a certain size house if you're not
you're eliminating
working.
the basic side of it too. So you're taking the basic out of it. So it's income, but the whole concept of basic income is it doesn't matter what you do in your own enterprise. You're going to get that money. Now you can choose to apply it in other ways, in other programs, at least under Andrew Yang's concept. Right?
Yeah.
Is everybody gets $1,000 a month. Doesn't matter if you're Bill Gates or you're Cruz Merritt. You're getting $1,000 a month. Now, if you're Bill Gates and $1,000 a month is nothing, you can say, you know what? Every time you do your W-4 and you claim all your dependents on your tax forms, you just go, you know what? I'd like to go ahead and donate my universal basic income to Greenpeace or whatever, some charitable organization. And that money's going somewhere that you'd like it applied. So you have that option. But no matter what, a grant's coming to you.
Yeah.
So under your concept, it sounds like it would be based on your chosen level of involvement.
Well,
if you choose to get that, and it would all be valued accordingly.
Yeah. See, and that's why this is just a
it sounds like you're about
now.
ready to create a bureaucracy.
Well, no,
that would be mind-blowing.
Maybe. I mean, who knows?
You know what I'm saying? Because you're going to have, that guy needs to control that side, or without oversight, this could go haywire. But then someone's going to have to cover that,
Yeah.
I like the theory, but if you're asking my opinion, I see bureaucracy written all over it if you're going to get that into the weeds.
Yeah. Well, and again, I need to think it through more. And we got to go here soon, but there's something about the idea of incentivizing citizens to actually care about the democratic process and pay attention to it in a manner that we don't do right now. Because there is no, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, because I know there's a couple things that happens, but as far as my day-to-day life, I'm pretty sure there's no consequence for me to completely not pay attention to anything going on. I don't have to know who my elected representative is, what their policies are, what this law or this bill is going to do. There's, other than the actual effects of them going into place or not, and that affecting my life, there's no like, hey, you didn't vote, so your insurance goes up, or you didn't vote, so like you're getting fined this amount. And I know it gets to the kind of like, well, now we're infringing on rights by doing that. So it's definitely not a well ironed out plan yet, but just the basic concept of incentivizing and rewarding citizens for being a part of the democratic process in a way that we don't do right now.
On face value, I love it.
Yeah, so the family's home now. We've been going for a while. We're good on time here. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for doing this with me.
Of course, my pleasure.
I'm really happy about how it went and all that. So, anything left to say? Anything? Where can people follow you?
Where can people follow me? That's a good question. I don't really get followed. They can join the Border Patrol, put in for Special Operations, and you can follow me there.
Perfect.
Yeah. Other than that, I just like to end things with gratitude. So, I would just reiterate how thankful I am for all the opportunities that I've had, and I'm thankful for my life right now is exactly where I want to be, and adversity or otherwise, it's all led me to this place, and so even this opportunity to do this with you is a blessing. So I'm grateful for that.
Well, thank you. I feel the same way, and you couldn't have said it better myself. I'm grateful for everything that I have, including you as my stepfather, you as my mother's husband. So thank you for being on here.
Of course.
And we'll see you next time, folks. Bye.
All right. Adios.